The mansion had a way of swallowing sound, its marble floors and gilded walls absorbing every footstep until the only thing that echoed was silence, and it was in that silence that Amara had learned to disappear. She had worked for the Calloway estate for almost a year now, moving through its endless corridors with a tray in her hands or a cloth over her shoulder, careful never to be seen unless she was needed, careful never to speak unless she was spoken to. It was not a life she had chosen so much as one she had fallen into after her mother's illness drained every savings account they had, and the wages from the Calloway house, though modest, kept the lights on in the small apartment she shared with her younger brother. She told herself every morning that it was temporary, that dignity was something you could set aside for a while and pick back up later, the way you might fold a coat and place it in a drawer until winter came again. Nathaniel Calloway rarely noticed the staff at all. He was a man built by boardrooms and quarterly reports, a billionaire by 34 who had inherited one fortune and multiplied it into 3, and the mansion he lived in was less a home to him than a place he returned to when there was nowhere else to be. He was, by most accounts, fair to the people who worked for him, paying well and demanding little beyond competence, but fairness and attention were not the same thing, and he had never once looked closely enough at Amara to know her name until the night everything changed. That night began the way so many others had. Nathaniel's fiancée, Victoria Ashcroft, had arrived for dinner in a red dress that caught every flicker of chandelier light, laughing too loudly at her own jokes, waving her hand for another glass of wine before the first was finished. Victoria was beautiful in the practiced way of someone who had spent her whole life being looked at, and she carried herself through the Calloway halls as though she already owned them, which, in a sense, she believed she soon would. She had grown used to snapping her fingers at whoever happened to be nearest, and on this particular evening, the person nearest was Amara. It started small, the way cruelty often does. Victoria complained that her wine was too warm, then that it was too cold, then that the maid serving her stood too close and breathed too loudly. She ordered Amara to fetch a shawl from an upstairs room, then complained the shawl was the wrong color, then sent her back up to find another. By 10 o'clock, what had begun as irritation had curdled into something crueler, a performance for no one in particular, as if Victoria needed to prove to the empty hallways that she held power over someone. She told Amara to stand by the wall near the east corridor and not move until she was called for again, and then, perhaps forgetting, perhaps not caring to remember, she never called for her again at all. Amara stood there for hours. The chandeliers dimmed as the household settled for the night, and still she stood, her back against the cool plaster, her feet aching inside shoes that had not been made for standing still for so long. She thought of her brother asleep in their apartment, of the rent due at the end of the month, of all the reasons a job like this mattered more than her pride, and she told herself that this too would pass, the way every difficult night eventually gave way to morning. She heard the clock in the hallway mark each hour, felt her legs grow heavy and her eyes grow heavier, and somewhere near 2 in the morning, exhaustion nearly buckled her knees, and she pressed her palm flat against the wall just to stay upright. It was Nathaniel who found her like that, returning later than usual from an overseas call that had run long into the night. He had not expected to see anyone awake, least of all a member of the household staff standing frozen against a wall in the near dark, her expression somewhere between fear and utter fatigue. He stopped walking. For a long moment he simply looked at her, and something in his chest tightened in a way he did not have immediate words for, an old, uncomfortable recognition that he had walked past this same hallway 100 times without ever truly seeing who occupied it. He asked her, quietly, why she was standing there at such an hour, and Amara, too tired and too startled to construct a careful answer, told him the truth. She explained that Miss Ashcroft had instructed her to wait and had not called her back, and that she had not wanted to leave her post without permission. She said it plainly, without accusation, because in her mind this was simply the arithmetic of her job, and she expected nothing from him but a nod and a dismissal. Instead, Nathaniel felt something colder settle into his voice than he had intended. He asked how long she had been standing there, and when she told him, he was quiet for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long. Then he told her to sit down in the small sitting room off the hallway, to rest, and that he would handle the matter himself. Amara hesitated, unused to being offered anything by the family she worked for, but exhaustion won over caution, and she sank into a chair for the first time in hours, her whole body trembling with relief. The following morning, the household staff noticed a shift in the air before anyone said a single word about what had happened. Nathaniel requested that the household manager review the full staff schedule, the treatment logs, the complaints filed and unfiled, And by mid-morning he had a clearer picture than he had ever bothered to seek before of how his own home actually ran beneath the surface of chandeliers and marble. He learned that Amara was not the first to be left standing for hours on Victoria's whims, only the one whose exhaustion had finally been visible enough for someone to notice. When Victoria came down for breakfast, she found Nathaniel waiting for her at the long dining table, his expression unreadable in a way she had rarely seen from him. She began, as she often did, with a complaint about the coffee, but he cut through it before she could finish, asking her plainly whether she had ordered a member of his staff to stand in a hallway for 6 hours without explanation or release. Victoria's laugh came quickly, dismissive, the kind of laugh meant to end a conversation before it became serious. She told him it was nothing, that the girl had probably exaggerated, that staff needed firm handling or they took advantage of kindness. She reached for her coffee cup as though the matter were already closed. It was not closed. Nathaniel told her, with a calm that unsettled her far more than anger would have, that he had seen the maid himself, had seen her barely able to stand, and that whatever Victoria believed about handling staff, cruelty was not a management style he intended to tolerate under his roof. Victoria's expression flickered, surprise giving way quickly to indignation, and she reminded him, sharply, that she would soon be mistress of this house, that these were exactly the kinds of decisions that would fall to her once they were married. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, and in that look was the quiet arithmetic of a man recalculating a future he had assumed was settled. He did not raise his voice. He simply told her that if this was how she intended to run a household she would one day share with him, then perhaps the future she was imagining was not one he wanted to be part of. The words landed heavier than either of them expected, and for the first time since their engagement, Victoria found herself without a ready response. Over the following days, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. Nathaniel made a point of speaking with the staff individually, something he had never done before, asking about their hours, their treatment, whether their work felt fair. When he reached Amara, he found her polishing silver in the small pantry off the kitchen, and he lingered in the doorway longer than necessary before finally stepping inside. He told her he was sorry, plainly and without excuse, for a year of not noticing what was happening under his own roof, and Amara, unused to apology from anyone above her in the household hierarchy, did not quite know how to respond beyond a quiet thank you. But something had shifted between them that could not easily be undone. Nathaniel found himself seeking her out in the days that followed, not with any grand design, but with the simple curiosity of a man realizing how little he actually knew about the people who kept his life running. He learned about her brother, about her mother's illness, about the quiet, steady resilience she carried without ever asking for recognition. She, in turn, began to see him not as the distant billionaire whose name was on every door in the house, but as a man capable of genuine remorse, capable of listening in a way she had not expected from someone in his position. Victoria, watching this shift from the edges of the household, grew increasingly desperate to reclaim her footing. She tried charm first, softening her tone, offering hollow apologies to Amara in front of Nathaniel that felt more like performance than sincerity. When that failed to smooth things over, she tried something colder, quietly instructing the household manager to reassign Amara to duties far from the family's daily paths, hoping that distance would erase whatever had begun to take root. But Nathaniel noticed the reassignment within a day, and when he asked why, the manager, uneasy, admitted that the instruction had come from Victoria. That was the final unraveling. Nathaniel called off the engagement not in a dramatic scene but in a quiet, private conversation, telling Victoria simply that he could no longer ignore who she truly was when she believed no one important was watching. Victoria left the estate within the week, her belongings packed into cars that idled in the circular driveway while the staff, for the first time in a long while, moved through the halls without flinching at the sound of footsteps. In the months that followed, the Calloway household became something quieter and, in its own way, kinder. Nathaniel restructured the staff's hours, raised their wages without being asked, and made it clear that no one in his home would ever again stand silently in a hallway waiting to be remembered. Amara stayed on, though her role within the household slowly changed, not through any sudden elevation but through the natural accumulation of trust and time. Nathaniel found himself seeking her counsel on small matters, then larger ones, and eventually simply seeking her presence, not because she served him, but because being near her felt like being near something honest in a life that had rarely offered him that. Their relationship, when it finally became something more than employer and employee, grew slowly, deliberately, neither of them rushing toward a conclusion the other might not be ready for. There were quiet dinners in the kitchen instead of the formal dining room, long conversations on the back terrace after the rest of the house had gone dark, small moments of laughter that neither of them had expected to find in a house that had once felt so cold. Amara's brother, now able to attend school without the constant worry of unpaid bills, often joked that his sister had traded one impossible job for an even more impossible one, falling for the man who owned the house she used to clean. By the time autumn arrived, the mansion no longer felt like a place where people disappeared into its silence. It felt, for the first time in a long while, like somewhere people were actually seen, and at the center of that change stood a woman who had once stood alone in a hallway all night, and a man who had finally learned to notice her.